Julian Vance moved through the gleaming aisles of his flagship store like a ghost haunting his own palace. The fluorescent lights hummed a sterile, monotonous tune, reflecting off the polished linoleum in long white stripes that seemed to stretch into infinity. Everything was perfect. The cans of organic tomatoes were aligned in perfect pyramids, their labels facing forward with military precision. The apples in the produce section were buffed to a high shine, each one a flawless crimson sphere. It was a temple of commerce, a monument to efficiency and success, and it left him utterly cold. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, the fine wool a shield against a world he observed but never truly touched. Outside, the city pulsed with the chaotic, vibrant energy of a Friday evening. Laughter spilled from restaurants, couples walked hand in hand, and the air, even with its urban bite, felt alive. In here, the air was filtered, controlled, and silent, save for the low thrum of the refrigeration units and the distant, tinny beat of a pop song played at a courteous volume. It was the sound of his life, controlled, quiet, and profoundly lonely. His gaze fell upon a small, forgotten item on a bottom shelf, partially obscured by a promotional display for artisanal crackers. It was a child's stuffed bear, its button eyes staring up at the unforgiving lights. A lost toy, a small, insignificant tragedy. But for Julian, it was a gut punch. The bear was a faded brown, just like the one his little brother Daniel had clutched in his final, feverish days, a lifetime ago. In a world of peeling wallpaper and rattling windows, that bear had been their only luxury. The memory rose, sharp and unwelcome. He was a boy again, helpless, watching his brother's small chest struggle for each breath. The scent of sickness, the oppressive quiet of a house steeped in poverty and fear. He had tried to be the hero. He had tried to get the medicine. He had failed. The success, the wealth, the gleaming stores, it was all a fortress built upon the foundations of that failure. A fortress with a single, inconsolable prisoner. He straightened up, pushing the memory down with practiced force. He was Julian Vance, CEO. He did not dwell. He moved forward. He signaled to a passing employee, a young man named David, who jumped to attention. "There's a lost item on the bottom shelf of aisle 7, Julian said, his voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil within. "See that it gets to lost and found." David nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mr. Vance. Right away, Mr. Vance." Julian continued his methodical inspection, his polished shoes making no sound on the immaculate floor. He was a king, surveying a silent, sterile kingdom, and he had never felt more alone. Outside, huddled in the meager shelter of the storefront's overhang, Clara shivered. The November wind was a thief, stealing what little warmth lingered in her threadbare coat. She pulled her thin gloves tighter, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She was waiting for Sam. He had only been meant to run in for a loaf of bread and some of the cheap orange juice Leo liked. 10 minutes, he had promised. It had now been 20. Worry, a cold and familiar companion, coiled in her stomach. Sam was a good boy, but he was impulsive, driven by a fierce, protective love for his younger brother that sometimes clouded his judgment. At 10 years old, he carried the weight of the world on his narrow shoulders, a world that Clara tried her best to shield him from. It was a constant, exhausting battle. She worked 2 jobs, a day shift at a diner, an evening one cleaning offices, and still they lived on the precipice. Every dollar was counted, every expense scrutinized. Leo's illness was a constant drain, not just on their finances, but on their spirits. His cough was a persistent, rattling soundtrack to their lives, a reminder of their fragility. Clara looked at her own reflection in the store's vast, dark window. She saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the weary set of her mouth. She looked older than her 24 years. She felt older. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and a man in a ridiculously expensive suit stepped out. He moved with an aura of untouchable authority, his face a mask of cool indifference. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the street as if it were all his property, before a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. He was from another world, a world where you didn't have to choose between medicine and bread. Clara looked away, a familiar pang of resentment and weariness settling in her chest. She just wanted her brother. She just wanted to go home. Suddenly, the calm of the store was shattered. A loud, angry voice echoed from within, followed by the frightened cry of a child. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She knew that cry. It was Sam. She burst through the automatic doors, her earlier weariness forgotten, replaced by a surge of pure adrenaline. Her eyes scanned the front of the store, and she saw them. A burly man in a manager's vest was gripping Sam's thin arm, his face contorted in a mask of self-important fury. In Sam's other hand, he clutched a loaf of bread and a small bottle of children's cough syrup. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "I told you, I have a problem with thieves in my store," the manager boomed, shaking Sam slightly for emphasis. "You think you can just walk out with this?" Sam's lower lip trembled, but he held the man's gaze. He whispered the words, so quiet Clara almost didn't hear them, but they struck her heart like a physical blow. "I'm not stealing," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm taking it for my sick brother." Clara rushed forward. "Let him go," she cried, her voice sharper than she intended. She reached for Sam, trying to pull him away from the manager's grasp. "Please, it's a misunderstanding. I can pay for it. I was waiting outside." The manager, a man named Mr. Harris, sneered down at her. "Oh, a misunderstanding. He had them stuffed inside his coat. Looks like plain old theft to me. I'm calling the police." Panic, cold and suffocating, seized Clara. The police, a record. It would ruin them. She fumbled in her pockets for her wallet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp it. She pulled out the few crumpled bills she had left. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's just a boy. Our little brother is sick at home. He was just trying to help." It was then that the man in the suit reappeared. Julian had been halfway to his car when the commotion had pulled him back. He had seen the manager grabbing the boy, had heard the child's desperate whisper. Each word was an echo from a dark corridor of his own past. "I'm taking it for my brother." He was suddenly back in another store, a dingy corner shop that smelled of sawdust and stale bread. He was small, terrified, his own hand clutching a bottle of medicine, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the boy's pale, defiant face. He saw the sister's raw, desperate panic, and he saw the manager's petty tyranny. The carefully constructed walls around Julian's heart didn't just crack, they fractured. He stepped forward, his presence instantly commanding the space. The air seemed to grow still. "That will be enough, Mr. Harris," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the manager's blustering like a shard of ice. Mr. Harris turned, his expression shifting from anger to stunned recognition, then to fawning servility. "Mr. Vance, sir, I was just handling a shoplifter." Julian's gaze didn't waver from the manager's face. "You were terrorizing a child," he corrected him coldly. "Let him go. Now." The manager released Sam's arm as if it were red hot. Sam stumbled back, straight into Clara's protective embrace. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, her own body trembling. Julian knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with the boy. The expensive fabric of his trousers creased on the sterile floor, but he didn't seem to notice. He looked at Sam, not with accusation, but with a deep, unsettling sadness that the boy couldn't understand. "Your brother is sick?" Julian asked gently. Sam nodded, still too scared to speak. He clutched the bread and medicine to his chest like a shield. Julian stood up and turned to Clara. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. He saw the fierce pride warring with her desperation. "I'll take care of this," he said, his voice softer now. He took the items from Sam's hand and walked to the nearest checkout counter. He placed them on the belt, then turned to the stunned cashier. "And 2 of those blankets," he said, pointing to a display of soft fleece throws. "And that brand of soup, 6 cans. And juice, the good kind, with extra vitamins, a carton of milk, eggs, and a bag of those oranges." He continued to add items, his voice calm and measured, filling a shopping bag with everything a small, struggling family might need. He was not just buying groceries. He was trying to mend a wound, 40 years old. He paid with a black credit card, the transaction completed in a silent swipe. He handed the heavy bag to Clara. It felt warm from the items inside. The weight was substantial. Real? She stared at him, speechless. The kindness was so unexpected, so overwhelming. It felt like a dream. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Thank you. I'll pay you back, I promise. Julian looked past her at the large glass windows. A cold, sleeting rain had begun to fall, smearing the city lights into a watercolor blur. He saw their thin jackets. He thought of the sick child waiting at home. Let me give you a ride, he said. It wasn't a question. It's no trouble. My car is right outside. Clara hesitated for only a second. The thought of the long, cold walk back to their apartment, of Sam's shivering frame and her own bone-deep exhaustion, was too much. She looked at Julian, at the strange sadness in his eyes, and she saw not pity, but something else, something that felt like recognition. She nodded. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. The ride was surreal. The interior of the car was a cocoon of soft leather and warm, silent air. It smelled faintly of something clean and expensive. Outside, the world rushed by in a cascade of rain and blurred light, but inside, it was preternaturally quiet. Sam sat pressed against Clara, his face turned to the window, watching the city lights streak by. The shame had been replaced by a quiet awe. He had never been in a car so nice. Clara held the warm grocery bag on her lap, the weight a comforting presence. She kept glancing at the man in the driver's seat. His profile was sharp, outlined by the passing streetlights. He drove with an easy, focused grace, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. He hadn't said a word since they had gotten in the car. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with unspoken things. He has bronchitis, she said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Leo, our little brother. The doctor said he needs to rest and stay warm. She felt a compulsive need to explain, to justify the events in the store, to make this stranger understand. The medicine helps his cough, especially at night. We were almost out. Julian didn't look at her, but his knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. I understand, he said, his voice low, and she knew, with a certainty that startled her, that he truly did. They directed him to their building, a tired-looking brick structure on a forgotten side street. It was a world away from the gleaming high-rises of the city center. When he pulled up to the curb, he didn't just stop and let them out. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence, deepening the intimacy of the small space. I'll help you with this, he said, taking the bag from her before she could protest. He followed them up 3 flights of stairs in a dimly lit hallway that smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. Clara was acutely aware of their poverty, of the peeling paint on their apartment door and the worn-out welcome mat. She felt the flush of shame, but when she looked at Julian, his expression was unreadable. He wasn't looking at the shabby surroundings. He was looking at her and at Sam. Inside, the apartment was small but meticulously clean. A threadbare couch was pushed against one wall, and a small television flickered in the corner. From the other room, the sound of a small, persistent cough echoed. "Leo," Sam whispered, and immediately ran towards the sound. Clara hesitated at the door. "You don't have to," she started, but Julian was already stepping inside, placing the bag of groceries on their tiny kitchen counter. "It's all right," he said. A small boy, with huge, dark eyes and flushed cheeks, appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning against the frame for support. He was wrapped in a faded quilt. This was Leo. He looked at the tall stranger in his living room with wide, curious eyes. "Sam," Leo rasped, his voice weak. "You got the juice?" Sam rushed to the grocery bag, pulling out the carton of expensive orange juice, his face lit up with pure triumph. "And bread," he said, holding up the loaf, "and a man helped us." Julian watched the scene, a knot tightening in his chest. The small, sick boy, the fiercely protective older brother, the sister holding it all together with sheer force of will. It was his own life, his own tragedy, played out in a different time, in a different apartment, but the ache was the same. He stayed for only a few more minutes, long enough to ensure they were settled. He watched Clara pour a glass of juice for Leo, her movements gentle and practiced. He saw her tuck the new fleece blanket around her brother's small shoulders. He saw a love so fierce and so pure it felt like a physical force in the small room. As he was leaving, Clara stopped him at the door. "I meant what I said," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will pay you back. Every cent." Julian looked down at her, at the determined set of her jaw. He saw her pride, her strength. "There's nothing to pay back," he said, and he meant it. He turned and walked away, descending the stairs and stepping back out into the cold, rainy night. But as he drove away, the warmth of that small, clean apartment lingered with him. For the first time in a very long time, the fortress around his heart felt less like a prison and more like an empty house waiting to be filled. The next week was a blur of quiet obsession for Julian. He couldn't shake the image of the three siblings from his mind. Their faces haunted his sterile board meetings. Their quiet dignity echoed in his vast, empty penthouse. He found himself driving past their street on his way home from work, a strange, protective impulse guiding him. He knew he had to do more, but he also knew that charity would wound Clara's fierce pride. He made a few calls. He used the resources at his disposal, the vast network of information his position afforded him. He learned their story. Their parents had died in a car accident 2 years prior, leaving Clara as the sole guardian of her two younger brothers. She had dropped out of community college, abandoned her own dreams to keep them together. She worked tirelessly, but the medical bills for Leo were a relentless tide, pulling them further and further under. His solution, when it came to him, was simple and elegant. He called his head of human resources. He explained that he was starting a new pilot program, an after-school internship for promising youngsters in difficult circumstances. The first intern would be Samuel, and his duties would be in the executive suite. The pay would be generous. It was a fiction, a carefully constructed excuse, but it felt right. When he called Clara to offer the position to Sam, her initial reaction was suspicion. "Why?" she asked, her voice wary. "Why would you do this?" "He's a bright boy," Julian said, his voice even. "He showed initiative. My company believes in investing in the future. He'll do simple tasks, watering the plants in my office, sorting the mail. It would be 2 hours, 3 days a week. It would give him a safe place to be after school until you're done with your first job." He had framed it perfectly, appealing to her practicality and her desire for Sam's well-being. She was silent for a long moment. He could hear the quiet hum of her apartment in the background, the distant sound of a television cartoon. "Okay," she finally said, her voice small. "Okay, thank you." And so, a new routine began. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Clara would drop Sam off at the gleaming glass tower of Vance Enterprises. She would stand awkwardly in the marble lobby, looking small and out of place amidst the throng of executives in their power suits. At first, Julian would send his assistant down to collect Sam, maintaining a professional distance. But he found himself watching the security monitors, waiting for her arrival. He saw the way she would smooth Sam's hair before letting him go, the quick, worried kiss she would place on his forehead. He saw the relief in her eyes when Sam would run back to her at the end of his shift, chattering excitedly about the fancy water cooler or the chair in Mr. Vance's office that spun all the way around. After the second week, he started going down to the lobby himself. "Clara," he would say, his voice formal, "let me buy you a coffee while you wait. There's a cafe on the mezzanine level." She always tried to refuse, but he was quietly insistent. So they would sit in the sleek, minimalist cafe, a small island of quiet amidst the corporate hustle. The first few times were stilted. They talked about the weather, about Sam's progress with the office plants, which were now thriving under his diligent care. But slowly, tentatively, the walls began to come down. He learned about her love for painting, a passion she had set aside. She learned that his favorite food was simple macaroni and cheese, a fact that seemed impossibly at odds with his tailored suits and expensive shoes. She saw glimpses of the man behind the CEO mask, a flicker of a smile when she told a funny story about Leo, a shadow of sadness in his eyes that he could never quite hide. One afternoon, the air was thick with the promise of snow, the sky a heavy bruised purple. They were sitting at their usual table, nursing warm mugs of coffee. Sam was in his office, diligently filing blank pieces of paper into a cabinet, a task he took with utmost seriousness. "He made you something," Clara said, pulling a folded piece of construction paper from her bag. She slid it across the table. Julian unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, waxy crayon. A stick figure of a man with scribbled black hair stood next to a smiling sun. It was unmistakably him. Underneath, in shaky, block letters, Sam had written, "Thank you, Mr. Vance." Julian stared at the drawing. Such a simple gesture, such a profound impact. He felt that old, familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it was different. It wasn't just grief, it was something else, a feeling of warmth seeping into the cracks. He looked up at Clara. Her eyes were soft, watching him. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile trappings of his success, he felt an overwhelming urge to be truly seen, to share the burden he had carried alone for so long. "I had a brother," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. "His name was Daniel. He was younger than me." Clara didn't speak. She just listened, her entire being focused on him. Her stillness was an invitation, a safe harbor. "We were poor," he continued, the words coming out in a slow, painful rush. "Not like you. Much worse. My parents worked all the time, but it was never enough. Daniel, he got sick. Pneumonia. The same rattling cough as Leo." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "The doctor said he needed medicine, a prescription we couldn't afford. I was 12. I thought I had to be the man of the house. I tried to take it from a store, just like Sam." His eyes were focused on a distant point, seeing a past that was more real to him than the polished cafe. "But I wasn't brave like your brother. I got scared. I ran. The store owner shouted at me. I dropped the bottle. It shattered on the pavement." He finally looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Daniel died 3 days later. I've always believed, if I had just been braver, if I had gotten that medicine, my whole life, everything I've built, it's been about making sure I would never be that helpless, powerless boy ever again." A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. For the first time in his adult life, he let his mask fall completely. Clara reached across the table, her small, warm hand covering his. It was a simple gesture of human connection, but it grounded him, pulled him back from the precipice of his own memory. She didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. Her touch was one of pure, undiluted empathy. "You were a child," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You were just a child, Julian. It wasn't your fault." And her use of his first name was a quiet intimacy that resonated deep within him. He looked at their joined hands on the cold granite tabletop. Her hand was small, the nails unpolished, the skin slightly rough from work. His was large and manicured. Two different worlds, touching. In that moment, he felt a profound shift within him. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for decades began finally to recede. As the weeks turned into a month, Julian became a quiet, steady presence in their lives. The fiction of Sam's internship became a comfortable reality. Julian started driving them home himself, foregoing his driver. He would come upstairs, ostensibly to check on Sam's work reports, which were just more crayon drawings. He would stay for dinner, eating Clara's simple homemade soup at their small, wobbly kitchen table. He used his resources, discreetly at first. He connected Clara with a top pediatric pulmonologist, framing it as a benefit of his company's new charitable foundation. Leo began a new treatment, and slowly, miraculously, the persistent, rattling cough that had been the soundtrack to their lives began to fade. The color returned to his cheeks. He started to laugh again, a sound that was pure music to Clara's ears. Julian discovered a part of himself he thought had died with his brother. He found joy in the simple things. He would read bedtime stories to Leo, his deep voice filling the small room. He would help Sam build elaborate Lego castles on the living room floor. He would sit with Clara in the evenings after the boys were asleep, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was no longer just the CEO. He was Julian. He felt himself healing. The sharp edges of his grief were softening. The empty spaces in his life were being filled with laughter, with the smell of Clara's cooking, with the comforting, chaotic clutter of a real home. He was falling in love. He was falling in love with all of them. The annual Vance Enterprises Legacy Gala was the pinnacle of the corporate social calendar, a glittering affair of champagne, string quartets, and carefully calculated networking. In previous years, Julian had endured it, a necessary performance of his role. This year, he wanted to share it. He wanted to show Clara his world, not to impress her, but to integrate her into it. He asked her to be his guest. She was hesitant, terrified of being so out of her element. "I don't have anything to wear," she had said, a small, vulnerable admission. Julian had taken care of it. A simple, elegant navy blue dress had arrived at her apartment, along with a pair of delicate silver shoes. There was no ostentation, just quiet taste. When he arrived to pick her up, she took his breath away. The dress highlighted her simple grace, and for the first time, he saw her not as a survivor, but as the beautiful, radiant woman she was. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air hummed with polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. At first, Clara clung to Julian's arm, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence. But Julian was a masterful guide. He kept her close, introducing her to a few trusted colleagues, his hand a warm, reassuring presence on the small of her back. He saw the world through her eyes, the ridiculousness of the ice sculptures, the beauty of the floral arrangements. For the first time, he was actually enjoying the gala. Then came Mr. Thorne, a cantankerous old money board member with a cruel streak. Thorne cornered them near the string quartet. His eyes, small and sharp, raked over Clara with undisguised condescension. "Vance," Thorne said, his voice a gravelly drawl, "I see you brought this year's charitable cause with you." "Very noble." He gave Clara a dismissive smile. "Tell me, my dear, what project are you?" The casual cruelty of the remark sucked the air from around them. Clara visibly flinched, her face paling. All her insecurities, all her fears about not belonging, rushed to the surface. She felt like a fraud, a little girl playing dress-up. Julian's face hardened into a cold, dangerous mask. "You will apologize to her, Thorne," he said, his voice dangerously low. Thorne just chuckled, enjoying the discomfort he had caused. "Don't be so sensitive, Vance. We all know you have a soft spot for strays. Just a bit of advice. Don't mix business with charity. It gets messy." He winked, then sauntered off to find a fresh glass of champagne. The moment shattered the magic of the evening. The music seemed jarring now, the laughter too loud. The beautiful ballroom felt like a cage. But it wasn't just the moment that was broken. Something inside Julian fractured as well. Thorne's words, as vile as they were, had struck a deeply buried nerve of guilt. Was that what this was? Was he just trying to fix his past? using Clara and her brothers as proxies for the family he had lost. Was his love just a complicated form of penance? The old, familiar self-loathing washed over him, cold and suffocating. He looked at Clara, at her hurt and confused face, and he saw the vast, impossible chasm between their worlds. The fear he had spent his life suppressing, the fear of loss, of failure, of not being enough, came roaring back, and he did what he always did when he was afraid. He built a wall. The change was immediate and devastating. On the ride home, the warm intimacy was gone, replaced by a cold, formal silence. He didn't walk her to her door. He just said a curt good night and drove away, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, the beautiful dress feeling like a costume. In the days that followed, he withdrew completely. He cancelled their dinners, citing urgent business. He sent his driver to pick up Sam for his internship, with polite, impersonal notes. When Clara called, his assistant would inform her that Mr. Vance was in a meeting. He retreated back into the safety of his sterile, controlled world, leaving her in a bewildered agony of confusion and heartbreak. Clara was devastated. She replayed Thorne's cruel words over and over in her mind. This year's charitable cause. Had that been all she was to him? A project, a way to assuage his guilt over a long-dead brother? The thought was a knife in her heart. The kindness, the shared laughter, the quiet moments of connection. She had thought they were real. Now she feared they were just a transaction, and she had been too naive to see it. Her pride, which had been soothed by his gentle care, now returned with a vengeance, raw and wounded. She felt used. She felt foolish. Sam didn't understand. He only knew that Julian didn't come over anymore. The Lego castles sat unfinished. The storybooks lay unopened. "Is Mr. Vance mad at me?" he asked Clara one evening, his small face clouded with worry. "No, sweetie," Clara said, her voice strained. "He's just very busy." But Sam knew something was wrong. He saw the sadness in his sister's eyes, the way she would stare out the window in the evenings. He missed Julian. He missed the way he would listen to his stories with such seriousness. He missed the feeling of the four of them together. To his simple, 10-year-old heart, it had felt right. It had felt like a family. So he decided to fix it. The next day, at his internship, he found Julian's office empty. The man himself was in a meeting. His assistant had said. Sam sat at the huge, polished desk. He took out his crayons and a fresh piece of paper from the supply closet. He drew with the fierce concentration only a child can muster. He drew 4 stick figures, a tall one with black hair, labelled Julian, a smaller one with brown hair, labelled Clara, a smaller one still, with a big smile, labelled Sam, and the smallest one, holding a balloon, labelled Leo. He drew them all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. It was a simple picture, a child's rendering of happiness. Underneath, in his best, most careful printing, he wrote 2 words, "Our family." He left the drawing in the very center of Julian's leather desk blotter, a silent, colorful plea in the stark, silent office. Julian returned to his office late that night, his mind a maelstrom of guilt and fear. The meeting had been a pointless distraction. He couldn't focus. He couldn't work. The joy had been leached from his life as suddenly as it had appeared. He had pushed away the only source of warmth he had ever known because he was a coward. Thorne's words had been a catalyst, but the poison was his own. He slumped into his leather chair, the weight of his loneliness pressing down on him. And then he saw it, the crayon drawing, lying in the single pool of light from his desk lamp. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. 4 stick figures holding hands. Our family. The simple, innocent truth of the drawing shattered his carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't about the past. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about fixing what was broken 40 years ago. It was about this. It was about them. It was about the future he was about to throw away because of the ghosts he refused to release. Sam hadn't drawn a rich man and a poor family. He hadn't drawn a benefactor and his project. He had drawn 4 people who belonged together. In his child's heart, he knew a truth that Julian, with all his intellect and success, had been too blind and too afraid to see. His fear wasn't protecting him. It was destroying him. It was costing him his one chance at a real home. A profound clarity washed over him. He knew what he had to do. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, left the glittering, empty office, and drove through the dark city streets, his heart pounding with a terrifying, exhilarating hope. He found Clara in the living room, packing a small, worn suitcase. A few of Leo's toys and Sam's books were in a cardboard box on the floor. The sight terrified him more than any boardroom showdown ever had. "Clara," he said from the doorway. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold and brittle. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice raw. "What does it look like?" she retorted, her wounded pride making her sharp. "I'm leaving, I'm taking my brothers, and we're going to stay with a friend for a while. I can't accept your charity anymore, Julian. It's too demeaning." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just before her. "It was never charity," he said, his voice pleading. "Clara, you have to believe me." "What was it then?" she challenged, her voice breaking. "A project? A way to feel better about your own past? Was I just a stand-in for a ghost?" He reached out, gently taking her hands. They were cold. "No," he said, his gaze intense, willing her to see the truth in his eyes. "You were the person who walked into my life and turned on all the lights. I was living in the dark, and I didn't even know it until I met you." He took a deep breath, the words he had held inside for so long finally breaking free. "What happened at the gala?" Thorne's words, "They didn't reveal a truth about you. They revealed a sickness in me, a fear I've carried my whole life, the fear of losing people I love. When I saw you hurt, I panicked. I thought pushing you away would protect me from feeling that pain again. It was cowardly, it was stupid, and I am so sorry." Tears were streaming down his face now, open and unashamed. "These last few days without you, without the boys, it's been a nightmare. It's been like my old life, but 100 times worse, because now I know what I'm missing. I'm not trying to save you. Clara, you saved me. You, and Sam, and Leo. You saved me from a life that was rich in everything but mattered in nothing." He squeezed her hands. "I love you," he whispered, the words feeling more real than anything he had ever said. "I love you, and I love your brothers. Please don't go. Stay. Build a life with me. Let me be a part of your family. Let us be a family." Clara stared at him, tears welling in her own eyes as his words washed over her, healing the wounds his silence had created. She saw the raw vulnerability on his face, the profound sincerity in his eyes. This was not the cold, distant CEO. This was Julian, her Julian, the man who read stories in a funny voice and who listened to her dreams with quiet reverence. She didn't need to say anything. She simply fell into his arms, her own sob of relief and forgiveness muffled against his chest. He held her tightly, as if he would never let go. And in that small, humble apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a life of struggle, 2 broken people, finally, completely, found their way home. 3 months later, the sun shone brightly on a crisp Saturday afternoon. The park was alive, with the cheerful noise of children playing. On a blanket, spread beneath a large oak tree, a family was having a picnic. Leo, his cheeks rosy with health, chased a bright red ball across the grass, his laughter clear and strong. He no longer needed the medicine, and the ghost of his cough was a distant memory. Sam was proudly showing Julian a new drawing, this one a detailed, fantastical spaceship, explaining the function of every engine and laser cannon with an expert's authority. Julian listened with rapt attention, his tie loosened, his suit jacket replaced by a comfortable sweater. The guarded, melancholic man from the grocery store was gone. In his place was a man at ease, his face relaxed, his eyes filled with a warm, gentle light. He looked over at Clara, who was unpacking sandwiches from a wicker basket. She met his gaze and smiled, a smile of such pure, unadulterated happiness that it made his heart ache in the best possible way. He had kept his promises. The following Monday, after his apology, he had called an emergency board meeting. He announced the launch of the Julian Vance Foundation, a massive charitable endeavor dedicated to providing top-tier medical care to children from low-income families. And he had introduced its new co-director, the woman who had inspired it and would run it with compassion and grace, Clara. He had stood before the likes of Mr. Thorne and, publicly, proudly, taken her hand, leaving no one in any doubt of her place in his life. But the public gestures were secondary to the quiet, private reality they were building. They had found a new house, one with a big yard for the boys to play in and a sun-drenched studio for Clara to paint in. It was a home, not a fortress. It was filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful, chaotic mess of a life being truly lived. Julian reached across the blanket and took Clara's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The world around them, the laughing children, the warm sun, the gentle breeze, seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was this, the four of them, together. He thought back to that night in the grocery store, a lifetime ago. He had been a ghost then, haunting the sterile aisles of his own life. He had been surrounded by everything and had nothing. Now he had everything that mattered. He had been found. He was home.